This is a 21st century look back at osteopathic medicine's origins, emphasizing the early formative period in Kansas. Here's a precious photo of Andrew Taylor Still from the Still family album, a rare glimpse into his early life in Kansas. Early photos of A.T. Still in Kansas are a rarity and a testament to the frontier conditions and the uncommon availability of photography at the time. He did not have a birth certificate. A.T. Still's birth was recorded in the family Bible. The photo album, a later luxury, was a testament to the family's pride in his achievements. With a short bio, you can see that it's recorded his accomplishments, probably in his sister's hand, as Mary Still had kept this album for the family, and it is at Baker University Archives, where she was a professor in the inaugural class. And you can see at the end it says he was the founder of osteopathy. I have no conflicts of interest. My name is Daryl J. Callahan, D.O. I'm an osteopathic family physician, board certified. Here are my learning objectives for today's presentation. These are not necessarily linear or entirely chronological. I will try to bring us back to timelines as we progress. Here's a nice reading list that I've been working off of for A.T. Still, and I've used information from much of these readings to help prepare this. I have several references as well, and on the slides I will be presenting. There may be some references on the slides or in the notes. I want to make mention of the Kansas State Historical Society, the Museum of Osteopathic Medicine, the Watkins Museum in Lawrence, Kansas, and the Cass County Public Library in Cass County, Missouri. Excellent resources. Also our Journal of Osteopathy and the D.O. magazine, as well as many others, including the Kansas City Public Library. May 21st, 1856, Lawrence is sacked and the Free State Hotel is being burned. Pro-slavery forces are getting ready to destroy Lawrence. Where is A.T. Still? Well, we know that he was in Douglas County. We have this detailed map. When you become a state, you get a nice survey done of all the property because there are going to be multiple claims for land. And so this is the 1857 survey that was done of Douglas County. And you can see here that there are several landmarks. I will point them out to you. As you come across the northern boundary of Douglas County, there's a river. That's the Kansas River today, or the Kaw River back then. This city or town right here is Lecompton. This is Lawrence. This is the Wakarusa. This rectangle here represents the Wakarusa territory. And then down here is Palmyra, which we're going to talk about a little bit. So I've blown up this rectangle over here, and you can see the log house next to a small town of Sebastian. Sebastian is a very small town, probably not even incorporated at this time, mostly tents for travelers to sleep in or something like this, or maybe troops. It was eventually renamed Eudora because Pascal Fish, the chief of the Shawnee tribe, has a daughter named Eudora, and they name the town in her honor as he sells off his claims to German immigrants. The Stills have a log cabin here. They have come from Missouri, and Abraham Still, Andrew's father, has built a log cabin. It has 2 rooms downstairs, 2 rooms upstairs. It serves as both a residence, a physician's office, and a schoolhouse. They teach the Indians. The women of the family are running a schoolhouse here for about 30 Shawnee Indian. So Pascal Fish is at the log house frequently, as it is close by, and it's where a lot of the Indian children are at. Almost on a daily basis, he would be there. He operates a ferry across the Wakarusa River, along with a cousin of his, Blue Jacket, has a ferry as well. So they would know each other quite well, the Stills and the Fishes. And Andrew will mention Pascal Fish in his autobiography. Over here we have a sketch that shows where the trails were. So these were the Oregon Trail. Up here is the Oregon Trail. It splits into a southern route that goes over Blanton's Bridge and a northern route that heads over here through Franklin south of Lawrence. Down here is the Santa Fe Trail near Palmyra. And you'll see there's a still claim here and a still claim here. There are going to be still claims in this area because they have to leave the Wakarusa when Pascal Fish sells it off. So they only live in the log house for a couple of years. At this time, it's all about Indians and slavery in territorial Kansas. And Harper's Weekly would have you fearing the Indians. Actually, the Still family got along well with the Indians and treated many of them as they had a horrible cholera epidemic that wiped out hundreds of the Shawnee tribe. The main problem was slavery, and it led to conflict after the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed by Congress and saying that the only states coming into the Union would be free states, and there would no longer be this compromise like they had with Missouri. And this sets up for a fierce and bitter strife, as Frederick Douglass said. So Lawrence is being formed at this time by immigration. Amos Lawrence is funding immigration through his New England Immigration Aid Company. This makes it affordable because of economies of scale. They could move people easier in groups, and they could reuse some of the materials and protect the trail. And here's one of the earliest known photographs of the Oregon Trail in 1859. So you may notice that there are these claims that for J.M. Still and F.P. Vaughn, just a little further up the Oregon Trail as it approaches Blanton's Bridge. That is near Blue Mound. That is James Still's claim. That's an older brother of Andrew Taylor Still. And Frederick Vaughn, his brother-in-law. Frederick is married to Barbara Jean Still. There's also a photo there of Mary Still, another sister who lives in the area, and she describes Blue Mound in her autobiography. Andrew Taylor Still is married to Frederick Vaughn's sister, Mary Vaughn. So these two men married each other's sisters. So that's their brother-in-law. So this is kind of a Still stronghold here. And of course there is Blanton's Bridge. And it says this mound can be seen for many miles each way. It is the highest point in eastern Kansas, I suppose. Edward Fitch, September 21st, 1856. Blanton's Bridge is a famous historical site because it is it is the site where the first gunshot of what would become the Civil War would occur. This is an accidental discharge by a man named J.B. Abbott. Abbott is a well-known figure in territorial Kansas. He is a big supporter of the New England Immigration Company, and he helps with supplying the immigrants with what they need in the way of everything from clothing to tentage to weapons. He helps the immigrants in many ways, and he's a well-known man in the area. A.T. Still writes about Abbott in his autobiography. Abbott comes to the rescue of a man named Branson, who's an abolitionist that gets into a situation where a friend of his, Charles Dow, is killed over a claim. And Branson is being arrested by a pro-slavery sheriff, and Sheriff Jones. Abbott comes to his rescue and rescues him away from Sheriff Jones, as he has done his own investigation and believes that Branson is not guilty of any crime. And Sheriff Jones is embarrassed by this when he's confronted at Blanton's Bridge by J.B. Abbott and a rescue party. They stop Sheriff Jones, and Abbott discharges his weapon. He will later say it was an accidental discharge. Sheriff Jones says he will get revenge, and he will come and get these abolitionists when he has enough militia to do so, and that pro-slavery Missouri militia will be coming to get them. This starts what's known as the Wakarusa War. It goes on for a couple of months, and it's finally resolved with a treaty by General Lane. He negotiates a treaty. During this period of time, Abbott has a warrant for his arrest, and he is hiding. He is in hiding along the Kansas River, and it's Andrew Taylor Still who is helping him hide. Andrew Taylor Still would later confirm in his autobiography that he was a scout surgeon, and he could scout out the best locations to hide. And they would need to hide during these periods of time because there really weren't very many abolition families in Kansas, only about 50 at the beginning, and this immigration would bring hundreds more. Abbott would organize these people into militia that would help protect their communities, and he kept lists of people that could provide a list of men that could be providing this protection. On those lists, in his logbooks and his notes, you can see that he has James Still and Andrew Still written down. Andrew Still is written down as the name of a person who will furnish their own horse. And James Still is listed under the name of a group of men that they're trying to put together as a militia, and they're trying to figure out how many weapons they have and who can bring a musket, who can bring a shotgun, who can bring a revolver, etc. Next to James Still's name, it says licensed preacher. I don't suppose he'll be bringing a weapon. Abbott also brings in weapons with this immigration company. He brings in Sharps rifles, which are the most elite weapon of the day. He also brings in howitzers, and these become known as the Free State howitzers, or Abbott's howitzers. Here's a picture of J.B. Abbott in his top hat, and he is with another rescue party. This rescue party is a few years later in 1859. It's one of the earliest photos we have of J.B. Abbott. This was national news when he rescued John Doy from an arrest about his abolition work in regards to the Underground Railroad. And when he was in hiding with Andrew Taylor Still, Dr. Still, Andrew wrote in his autobiography that they talked about many things, everything from engineering to the science and to the medical system of the day. And they were both very dissatisfied with the methods of medical care. And he wrote that J.B. Abbott told him that he was satisfied that the whole thing was wrong and it would have to practically be overturned. This was a motivating factor for the younger Andrew Taylor Still. During this period of time, A.T. Still, and you can see here in the sketch on his mule, would have to ride the trails with much caution because he would often run into pro-slavery militia, and he would ride with an unslung rifle and 2 pistols on his belt. He describes a time when he was stopped by a man named Captain Owens, a pro-slavery militia captain who had a small company there. He got off his mule and he engaged with the men and put them through some drill and ceremony and told them they weren't ready to fight General Lane and challenged him a bit. Captain Owens said, "This is Dr. Still, the damnedest abolitionist out of hell, who's not afraid of hell or high water. In politics, he's our enemy. In sickness, he's proven to be our friend." And he gave him free passage to go take care of his patients. In fact, he even escorted him to his next patient, and he told his men that he knew Dr. Still well because he had cured his wife or helped her recover from cholera. Where is A.T. Still? He is in Palmyra. His claim is down near Palmyra. He has a 480-acre claim there with his brothers Thomas, and you can see this is Thomas here, and then we also have John Wesley, 2 of his younger brothers, and they have this 480-acre claim here in section 3 and 4, just south of Palmyra. This becomes Baldwin, Kansas. You can see it's right on the Santa Fe Trail, so they indeed would see people going to Pikes Peak during the gold rush. Also, there is a mail drop here. A man by the name of Jacob Hall operates the mail drop here. Jacob Hall is an attorney from Independence, Missouri. He has the federal contract on the Santa Fe Trail from Independence to Santa Fe, New Mexico to deliver the mail. And when you have a federal contract, it gives you the rights to preemptive claim if you've made any kind of improvements on your mail drop. And Jacob Hall will, make preemptive claims along the Santa Fe Trail at these mail drops. When he makes his preemptive claim here, the Still brothers have already donated the land, the 480 acres, to Baker University to start the university. He makes a preemptive claim, and the Stills decide that they're not going to fight his preemptive claim. Instead, they pay a mortgage, $3,000 to pay off the claim. Jacob Hall will go along the Santa Fe Trail and do this in other communities. Some of the communities, like Council Grove, Kansas, will challenge him in court and win. And Jacob Hall's estate will be penniless after his death over the number of claims that he made. But this gives us some insight into how the Stills solved their problems. They were not that confrontational, especially given the times when people were very confrontational over these claims. Abraham, their father, for example, had a claim up on the Kansas River, which was a beautiful claim that a squatter took from him who was a former patient. And he was very upset about it, and his sons were going to go take it back by force, and he would not let them do it. So this is how they were. They were more peaceful. Here's a warranty deed from Palmyra, and it shows that Andrew Taylor Still indeed was one of the trustees of the town. He, along with a man named Barrick Lowe and a man named J.B. Abbott, there's Abbott again, James Blood, Daniel Fry, and A.T. Still were the trustees of Palmyra that will eventually become Baldwin. And here they've sold lots. And I guess if you are a collector of autographs, especially Still autographs, this would be a great find, because this warranty deed is for Abraham Still. And it is signed by his son, A.T. Still. So you have both father and son on the same document. It's a rather weathered document from 1859. It's in the archives at Baker University. If you unfold it, it's more pristine on the inside than it is on the outside. And I've chopped it up here a bit because I didn't think you really needed to see all the lots that he bought for $100. He was speculating, and this was done in those days. A.T. Still also had several lots in what will become Baldwin. They will rename the town Baldwin because a man from Ohio will build a mill there, and he intends for his son to operate that mill. He's a wealthy man, and he buys stock or lots in the town, and they name the town for him. He comes to visit the town and gets the mill operating. His son comes to run the mill, and his son dies a few weeks later from a fever. Mr. Baldwin does not really stay involved in the town for very much after that, but the Still family does. They will build Baker University. Just north of Palmyra, you may have noticed on the map, was Kibby's cabin. Here's an authentic replica of it. At Kibby's cabin was decided that there would be a university built in Baldwin, and the university would be named Baker University in honor of Bishop Baker. This was at a Methodist conference, and they had several Methodist conferences in the Kansas Territory. The first one was in Lawrence, and there was another one on Blue Mound, and then there was one at Kibby's cabin. And they were trying to decide where to build churches and how they were going to organize themselves and which preachers would be in which circuits serving these churches. Abraham Still played a big role in that, and he ends up being one of the founding trustees of Baker University. And his son, Andrew Still, who owns a sawmill in Baldwin at the time, is the superintendent of construction. Andrew is successful in operating a sawmill with his brother and the Barrick Lowe sons. They offer sawed wood for a 20-mile radius. He has a steam-powered 40-horsepower sawmill, and this is a successful business for him. So he is the superintendent of the construction of this building. This becomes the largest, most formidable building on the frontier, and stands out, and people are in envy of it in a lot of ways because it's the best building around. Initially, it's a 2-story building with a flat roof, but the roof leaks, so they put on a 3rd story. The Masonic Lodge builds it so that the 3rd story so they can have a place to meet, and they put a pitched roof. This becomes known as the Old Castle, and you can see here Abraham and Martha Still. Abraham is, like I said, on the trustees. On the other side of the Old Castle is a white building here, and this is Blood Grocery Store. James Blood ends up becoming the postmaster of Baldwin. They moved this from north of town on the Santa Fe Trail. They moved it to this location, and now this is a National Historic Site on the campus of Baker University. Andrew Taylor Still will claim Baldwin as home for 20 years. And we know this from several different sources. He, of course, wrote about it in his autobiography, but you can also see it here on his Civil War pension claim. Question number 10, you can see it says, where have you lived since discharge? That would be discharge from the military. And it says Baldwin, Kansas to 1875, then Kirksville, Adair County, Missouri to this date. So this is the home, one of the homes. He had several houses in Baldwin, and like I said, he probably speculated on a few of those lots. And this is the one that's recognized as the house that he lived in Baldwin, according to the Museum of Osteopathic Medicine. He will eventually be shunned by the community and says that he cannot walk down the streets of Baldwin, or he can walk down the streets of Baldwin and have them all to himself because everyone else goes the other way. He is shunned for his beliefs in the practice of medicine and how he wants to change it, and has been using these manipulative methods to do that. Prior to being shunned by the community, he is a distinguished member of the community. He owns a sawmill. His father is obviously a prominent minister in the area. Andrew is successful himself with a property, sawmill, as a physician, a practicing physician, and also as a legislator. He runs for office and is elected to the first Free State Party legislature in Kansas. And you can see here they had a mass convention, and the secretary of that convention is J.B. Abbott again. So he knew this man very well. You can see where the polling places are. One polling place is Fish Hotel, another one is Palmyra. So these mass conventions started at this time over slavery and abolition and the political climate of the day. So people were leaving the Democratic Party and the Whig Party over this contention about slavery, and that there would be a new free state, the state of Kansas, and it had to be free or it couldn't come into the Union. So there were mass conventions in other places along the northern states, including Ohio and Michigan, and of course in Kansas, and they called themselves the Free State Party initially. Eventually it becomes the Republican Party. Now, many of them have claimed that they started the Republican Party, but really it was a movement across multiple states and initially known as the Free State Party. The seating of this territorial legislature is a big event. It's the first Free State legislature, and there's this entourage that you can see in this mural, and this mural hangs at the Watkins Museum in Lawrence, Kansas, as a part of an exhibit of General Lane. And General Lane escorts these folks. It's an entourage from Lawrence all the way up to Lecompton. Several hundred people, probably over 1,000, are in this entourage. And they are escorted by an army, General Lane's army, Lane's Brigade. They also have an army band. This is a big event. A.T. Still rides out ahead of this, the scout surgeon that he is, and arrives at Lecompton ahead of this entourage. And in his autobiography, he talks about this, and there's this sketch of him pointing it out, that this entourage is coming. And he has already been engaged with these bushwhackers that are there from Missouri. The men that are with A.T. Still say, hey, you probably ought to back off. These guys mean you harm. And A.T. Still opens his riding coat and says, that's good because I brought my two friends these two revolvers. And he has two pistols on his belt. The bushwhackers eventually see this army coming up over the hill and hear the band and see that A.T. Still is pointing it out and saying, we plan to do whatever General Lane tells us to do. Thank God he's coming with an army. And the bushwhackers disperse. They're outnumbered. There are a few that come back and try to disrupt the proceedings, and they are removed by force from the legislature. A.T. Still predicts the end of slavery at this moment. He says to the bushwhackers, we propose to break every link in the pro-slavery chain and do all that Jim Lane requires to make Kansas free for all men. No master, no slave. So the seating of this legislature makes, the illustrations in national newspapers. And here's an illustration of General Lane getting up and speaking to the crowd. And you can see the howitzers in the background. Those are the Abbott howitzers or the Free State howitzers. And you can see one of the early photographs, one of the early known photographs of a howitzer battery here. So Lane gets up and he talks to the crowd and shouts in defiance to them. Lane is elected the president of this Free State legislature. Andrew Taylor Still is in the crowd and, of course, seated in this legislature. From 1857 to 1859, he serves in the legislature. General Lane becomes a very famous person. Not only does he have his own army, the Lane's Brigade, but he's a politician and a lawyer. He runs into some trouble though when he gets shot. He has a dispute over a claim. He has filed his dispute at the land office in Lecompton. It's a well-known dispute that he has with a man named Jenkins, who many people admire Jenkins as well. Jenkins is coming over to take water off of Lane's claim. He has a man with him who is armed, and Lane comes out of his house also armed. The man that is with Jenkins shoots Lane in the leg. Lane discharges his weapon and shoots Jenkins and kills him. Now, if you like General Lane, you say it's justifiable homicide. If you don't like him, you call him a murderer. And so you can see both sides of that story getting it published about such a famous person. Lane becomes famous for several things. He takes Lane's brigade, for example, all the way to Washington, D.C., and protects Abraham Lincoln after the inauguration and stays for several weeks. Abraham Lincoln appoints him U.S. Senator of the Kansas Territory. It's a non-voting position, but he's the first senator from Kansas. Abraham Lincoln will give $100 to Baker University. But General Lane has been shot in the leg. This is a significant wound in the frontier. A surgeon by the name of Fuller is treating Lane, and he calls Andrew Taylor Still to his assistant to come assist him. He needs assistance. This is quite a compliment to Andrew Taylor Still's ability as a physician and surgeon, to have another surgeon call you in for your skills to help you. Dr. Fuller cannot find the bullet. Lane has been shot in the lower leg, below the knee. Andrew Taylor Still is able to find the bullet in his thigh. So this is a bullet that has traversed from below the knee to above the knee. That is a significant wound. Most people would succumb to this wound. Oftentimes it would lead to an amputation in the frontier, which had a very high mortality, probably 70 to 80% mortality on amputations in the frontier. By probing the wound and finding the bullet, I think that A.T. Still showed that he had this knowledge about the supremacy of the artery. You can find many accounts of this shooting of Lane. Mary Still remarks about it in her autobiography, as Abraham Still and Mary have been summoned to the home of Lane to pray for him. And indeed they do. And Mary Still says that she believes that General Lane received salvation at that moment. He would later be baptized in a creek nearby. When people would water their horses at that creek, they would say, "Don't water your horses below the site where Lane was baptized, because there are evil spirits." Lane survives this wound, and I believe that Andrew Taylor Still learned the rule of the artery is supreme at this moment. That is my assumption. He didn't say it that way, but today we say it's the rule of the artery is supreme. That axiom is accredited to Dr. Andrew Taylor Still. Actually, what Still said is the rule of the artery is absolute, universal, and it must not be obstructed or disease will be the result. We have to think about the medical care of the time. John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, is a leader in medical care of the time. So is the teachings of Benjamin Rush. He is the founder of the Rush College of Medicine, and there are a few of those already in America. He is the medical authority of the day. Wesley teaches his ministers to become physicians and preachers. He taught salvation, forgiveness, and godliness is cleanliness. They carried a Bible, they carried a prayer book, they taught their parishioners to pray before they eat. They would save their soul, and they had the medical knowledge to treat and save their body. They would carry with them the book that John Wesley wrote on primitive physics. It was basically home remedies. It went into multiple editions. By the time Andrew Taylor Still would have read it, it would have been in its 24th or 25th edition. Benjamin Rush, the medical authority of the day, was correct on many things. He brought explanatory theories, for example, to the forefront. He brought physical and mental hygiene to the forefront. Both of these men, Wesley and Rush, were abolitionists. But Benjamin Rush defended depletion for many decades, and he was horribly wrong about this practice. This was the idea that you could deplete the body of certain fluids as a treatment. For example, bleeding or bloodletting or purging. He had a commercial product, so I guess he had a conflict of interest. He had a commercial product called Thunderclappers. It was 50% mercury. It was a cathartic. They would dose this based on salivation of the patient, and they called it salivating the patient. Andrew Taylor Still had been salivated a couple of times by his father. I suppose he was a rather constipated child. Still has personal tragedies that build resilience. In one of these early photographs of him, you can see he looks like a very resilient man. His first wife dies in 1859, leaving him 3 children. He says she died of the first thing that came along. And he explains further. He said that she was depressed, that she was in postpartum depression. They had lost a child a few days after birth. And she died about 2 or 3 months later of the first thing that came along. The cause of her death is unrecorded. He remarries in 1860, Mary Elvira Turner. She has the same first name as his first wife. I guess you don't get them confused that way. She is the daughter of a physician, and she says, "I'll never marry a physician," but of course she did. She's a school teacher and later becomes a druggist. She's a career woman. A.T. Still does not return to political life after the death of his first wife. Had he stayed in political life, he probably would have been a signer of the Kansas Constitution. He had to find a better way, the birth of osteopathy. He said, "I began to see during the Civil War in that part of the states of Missouri and Kansas where the doctors were shut out, the children did not die." A rather honest and harsh assessment of his situation in Kansas with the reference to the loss of children like his own. He will lose 3 children in succession to spinal meningitis. His father and brother will come to attend the children. Everything they tried failed. He is disillusioned by the medical care of the day. And he lives in a very difficult neighborhood where there are many skirmishes. And you can see here the bushwhackers, all the skirmish sites in Douglas County and in the eastern part of the border part of the state of Kansas, the border with Missouri. And then on the other side of the border, you can see all these skirmishes that occur in what becomes known as the Burnt District because they burned so many of these communities. General Lane has Lane's Brigade, and he sacks and burns the town of Osceola, Missouri in September of 1861. He, along with other Jayhawkers, helped create what was known as the Burnt District by enforcing orders number 10 and 11. These were orders that required the evacuation of these communities that were pro-slavery, and they would evacuate these people by force and burn their homes. This is neighbor against neighbor, and we thought you just had to worry about the Indians. In response to the burning of Osceola, Quantrell's raiders come back later in 1863, and they burn Lawrence and sack it again. But they saved the Eldridge Hotel. Apparently, Quantrell liked eating there. It is it is told as a story that Quantrell stopped in Eudora, Kansas, and had a beer at a German tavern north of town. That some people identified him there, and 3 men went to warn Lawrence, but none of them made it. He rode overnight with these men. They were exhausted, and many of them slept in the saddle and tied themselves in so that they could sack Lawrence at first light. I don't think he probably stopped in Eudora, and maybe that is just folklore. When he exited Lawrence, his retreat away from the sacking of Lawrence, he took him over Blanton's Bridge, and he stopped and he burned the bridge. The Blanton's Bridge was never rebuilt. He also stopped at a little village near there called Brooklyn and burned it. This would be very close to James Still and Frederick Vaughn's claim at Blue Mound. Blue Mound is a sentry location with flags to signal incoming bushwhackers. Mary Still describes in her autobiography that they had a field glass and flags, and that James would often man the flags, and that they would signal Lawrence and give them warning of approaching bushwhackers. They could not find the flag that day. A Major Plum brings his unit there, and he observes that Quantrell is leaving over Blanton's Bridge, and he gives chase. This breaks up Quantrell's plans to go burn Baldwin. The governor of Kansas has, of course, called out the militia, but he tells them to stay in place, stay in the communities where they can protect them. So where is A.T. Still? He is in Baldwin, Kansas, with his local militia, where he has been elected captain of the 18th Regiment. They are to protect the Santa Fe Trail in and around Baldwin. They do not give chase to Quantrell because they are to stay in place and protect their community. This is a controversial decision by the governor. He has a couple of units that are giving chase to Quantrell. They can't catch him. Quantrell is very adept at hiding, and he knows this route fairly well. He takes another route through Franklin County and makes it back to Missouri. Where is A.T. Still? Well, let's stop and give a little timeline here. We've talked about a lot of things. So he moves to the territory in 1853, and eventually he's in the Civil War in 1861 and again in 1864. He has two distinct periods of service, one as a listed man in 1861 and one as an officer in 1864. Kansas became a state in 1861, and the Civil War started. A.T. Still enlists. He goes to Fort Leavenworth and he enlists as an enlisted man. He's a private. There's a photo of him from the family album. Also, you can see that photo in Frontier Doctor, written by Charles Still, and later written again by his grandson, Charles Still Jr. So he joins up, and he says, I'm in the F Company of the 9th Kansas Cavalry, volunteers. But when they get to Fort Leavenworth, they're assigned to the Cass County Home Guard. So it's like, okay, where did he serve? He served in Cass County, Missouri, in the Cass County Home Guard. They took this group of Kansas, several of these companies, out of the 9th Cavalry, and they assigned him over to a Union federalized unit called the Cass County Home Guard. And they were going over into Cass County and converting those towns back to Union. After General Price had won the battle at the Battle of Lexington, they chased him down to Springfield and on back into Arkansas, and then they came back to the Harrisonville area of Missouri, and they patrolled that area for about 5 months, so from September of 1861 to February of 1862. That's where A.T. Still was at. Later in 1864, he will serve as a major, and that's where you see him on this mule. And this is a sketch from his autobiography where he says osteopathy is in danger because these men are at the Battle of the Big Blue, and he's leading them into battle, and he's shot at. He has a musket ball go through his jacket, but does not hit him. That mule will end up on top of him, and it's on his lower half, which probably keeps him from getting shot, but creates a hernia because he's trying to get this mule off of him. He will later claim a hernia as one of his Civil War claims for pension. So what happens in 1864? There's this proclamation that goes out by the governor that every able-bodied man, 16 to 60, will report and muster and be placed into Kansas State Militia regiments. A.T. Still is one of these men, and he's had a history of surviving in the Civil War, as many sturdy frontier men could do. And he serves with the 21st Regiment under his old commander, Sandy Lowe. Colonel Sandy Lowe was Captain Sandy Lowe in the Cass County Home Guard, so they know each other well. And it says here that in this letter written home by a soldier, it's actually probably a public announcement from the unit, Public Affairs, and it's a soldier's letter home to the Lawrence Tribune, and it's a couple of days before they go into battle. It's October 20th, 1864. And a few words from the 21st KSM will doubtlessly be interesting to many of your readers. We are very pleasantly situated in a beautiful field joining the old Johnson Mission. That's the Shawnee Mission over closer to Kansas City, the pro-slavery mission. Joining the old Johnson Mission, 2.5 miles west of Westport. We are enjoying camp life with the zest equal to a young Quaker kissing his wife. That's a joke about Quakers because, of course, they don't do any public display of affection. We think ourselves just as good soldiers as were ever marshaled on the plains of Kansas. The boys are all anxious to have a conflict with old Price and his hordes of devils that are infesting Missouri, destroying property, those miserable cannibals infesting the caves and mountains of Arkansas and Texas. Colonel Sandy Lowe, commander of the gallant 21st, will lead us to history and to conquer. Later it says, Major A. Still can be seen gallantly taking his position with all his eccentricities, fearless of danger. The Major's presence inspires the men with life and jollity, which makes camp life comparatively pleasant and easy. Major A. Still, with all his eccentricities, fearless of danger. Sounds like our guy. We know what happens at the Battle of the Big Blue because it's recorded very well in a journal by Samuel Reeder. Samuel Reeder journals are a prized possession of the Kansas State Historical Society, as he has kept immaculate journals of what it is like on the frontier dating back to 1854. He is called up just like every able-bodied man, and he's in the 2nd Regiment, KSM. He's a private, and he keeps these beautiful journals, including artwork that he does. He is at this road crossing north of Hickman Mills in the Kansas City area at a place called Maccabee's Farm, and they're blocking a road. This is a blocking procedure. It's a defensive procedure. The men have been called up to defend Kansas, and many of them are in a defensive position on the Kansas border, including the 21st Regiment with A.T. Still. But the 2nd Regiment has been brought forward into Missouri and to block this road. General Curtis, the overall general of the Union Army, is shaping his battlefield. And he is shaping it to protect his flank, which is a vulnerable area. And he knows his enemy wants to get there, and they'll probably get there quicker if they use cavalry, right? So he blocks the roads, and he blocks the fording areas where they can ford a stream or a river. And as they're crossing the Big Blue, they want to use this road to get to the flank of Curtis, and he blocks it with this regiment of infantry. This creates a battle, and it's the big battle of the Big Blue, and it's a couple of days before the Battle of Westport. This battle, along with the Battle of Westport, becomes known as the Gettysburg of the West. This is a very important battle in the Civil War because when they defeat the Confederacy here, it is defeated in the West, and they can focus on the East and the march towards Atlanta. So this is a very important battle. This is the actual art piece that is sanctioned historical art piece of the battle, and again, it's by the same artist, Reeder. And you can see the men are forming a skirmish line along a fence row, and there's probably about 600 men in this regiment. It's a plussed-up infantry regiment. They're plussed up because they have armor. They have these howitzers, you can see. Coming over the rise, you can see up here on the rise, there is the cavalry of the Confederacy, led by General Shelby. There's 5,000 men up there. This is more like 500 or 600 men. Those men up there are mounted on horses. These men are not. They are outmanned. And this is what it looks like when a cavalry runs through a regiment of infantry. They are creamed. They lose 100 men, 100 men killed, 50 are wounded, 50 are taken POW, including Reeder, so we have a nice account of that. And the other 200 or so are scattered about as an ineffective force. The 21st Regiment is coming to reinforce them, and they come into this battle, and they reinforce them and turn some of those men around, as A.T. Still describes in his autobiography, and push them back into the battle. And they defend this location on the road and block it. They successfully block this road, and the cavalry turns north towards Westport, where they will be defeated a couple of days later. Well, we know some of this, of course, because of Reeder's journals, and we know it because of history, but we can't find the ledgers of this unit, this 21st Regiment. We don't it's like lost to history. We can't find the regiment. If you go to the Kansas National Guard Museum, as I did, and you ask to see the units that were Civil War units for Kansas, the 21st Regiment wasn't there last summer of 2023. And I had looked for these ledgers before. I had to take Army War College, and I had to write papers, and I wanted to write about Andrew Taylor Still in the Civil War. And you really couldn't find much because you couldn't find any evidence of this unit. No payroll, no unit roster. And so I did find it. It's been digitized. I found it in the summer of 2023, and this is it. And I know you can't see it very well, and I just wanted you to understand how large these ledgers are. They're 3 foot long, a couple feet wide. When you open them up, they're 6 feet long. And a soldier's entire military record will be on one line, and it's in cursive writing, written by the company clerk, and has his name, his rank, his serial number, whatever. As if he had any promotions or demotions, where he served, what unit he was in, etc. This is typeset. This is not in cursive writing. And you can see there's a header above with a lot of information and a footer below that's signed and a lot of information there. Let's blow that up. So these are the 2 columns that you saw, and there's Sandy Lowe, the colonel of the 21st, first on the list, as he should be. First, he's in charge. He's the commander. And a couple below that is Andrew T. Still, Major Still. He's the field officer. He's 3rd in command. And a couple of 3 more below that is James Still, his brother, the surgeon. And you can see there's a pay column over here. Let's look at that a little closer, along with that footer. And you can see there they are, Andrew and James Still. And Andrew's paid $74.60, and James is paid $67.20. And it gives the dates when they mustered in. Still would have mustered in 10 days before. Andrew would have mustered in 10 days before James. That might be the difference in their pay. But they're not paid until 1870, and they don't sign for their own pay. And Sandy Lowe's the only one to be able to sign for his own pay. This is 6 years after the battle that these men are paid. They're not paid because they're not regular federal Union Army troops. They're state militia under the control of the governor. So the state has to make a claim, and they have to go back and they have to redo these ledgers because they mustered these guys together so quickly. They probably ran out of paper. In fact, Fort Scott had many requests at this time. They had so many men coming through Fort Scott after this battle. They had many requests for paper. They couldn't log all the men. These claims are not finalized, as you can see here above in that footer, until November 7th, 1907, 40 years after the battle. Adjutant General Hughes signs it. He says it's one of the darkest days in Kansas history, that it's taken this long to pay all these claims. And there were many claims. There were claims for property, horses, saddles, fence lines, all kinds of claims. The claim for the pay required them to typeset and write up a ledger like this to get these men paid. This is causing more disillusionment. When AT returns to Baldwin, here he is, one of the leaders of this unit, almost 670 men, and they didn't get paid. So he's very disillusioned. He's lost 3 children, a wife. He's had to endure 2 stints in the Civil War. His father dies in 1867. He's at his bedside. He says, "What do you see on the other side?" His dad says, "I just see darkness." AT questions his spirituality. He questions medical methods of the day, and he's accused of healing by laying on of hands, and he's rejected by his church. He says, instead of asking God to bless the means being used, far better to search for the right means. He's not the only one doing this. Oliver Wendell Holmes, and I'm paraphrasing, he says, if we could take all of medicine and throw it in the ocean, it'd be better for mankind, but worse for the fish. And he has to walk that back because he's given that to the Massachusetts Medical Society in 1860. They're a little bit shocked by that. He walks it back and he says, well, the anesthesia's pretty good. Of course, he helped invent it. Andrew Taylor Still says, my science or discovery was born in Kansas under many trying circumstances. The frontier was a good place to get the truth. He quotes Henry Ward Beecher in his autobiography. Time to test our knowledge. Let's take you up to 1874, 10 years after the Civil War. What did A.T. Still do in 1874? Did he coin the term osteopathy? Did he recover from his wounds? Did he fling the banner? Did he become a bone setter? 1874, June 22nd. This is the birth date of osteopathy, and we get this from Andrew Taylor Still. He says, I flung the banner to the breeze in 1874. Why does he say that in 1874? He's been practicing this way for, a decade or more prior to that, a couple of decades. Why does he say that in 1874? He doesn't start the school until 1892. So why does he pick this date? I believe he picks this date because he has to make a conscious decision that he's not going to practice the old ways anymore, because he has to register as a physician in Missouri. And they're registering physicians for the first time, and they're doing it by county. And this is his registration. And it's about this time that he's contemplating this registration as a physician. And I believe that's when he had a mindset spiritually and intellectually that this was the date that he awoke, and he said that I'm not going to practice that way anymore. But he has another setback in 1876. He has typhoid fever, and he loses nearly a year of his life. He almost dies. He's not a very big man, and I should have shown you on his pension claim that he was 6 foot tall, 187 pounds. He weighs $180. He's not a very big guy, but he loses more weight, and he looks gaunt, and his hair turns gray, and they start calling him the old doctor, if you like him. If you don't like him, you call him the old Indian doctor. He could speak Shawnee. He learned it from his mother. He could read it, he could write it, and he thought in Shawnee. Oftentimes when he's trying to solve a difficult problem, he did it in Shawnee. He taught it to his daughter Blanche, too. Well, we've talked about A.T. Still quite a bit, but we have one more big thing to talk about, and that's the golden hour of medicine. That began 150 years ago. And also in 1874, he said, I proclaimed that a disturbed artery marks the beginning of an hour and a minute when disease began to sow its seeds of destruction in the human body. So he was not only the one that talked about the supremacy of the artery, he also talked about the golden hour. And we use this still today. We use it in stroke, we use it in myocardial infarction, we use it for tourniquet time. We also use it when we're saying that we need to start an antibiotic in order to avoid a septic shock. It must be started within an hour. So we use this today, and it's credited to him in 1874. Teaser, did the supremacy of the artery assist in the licensure of chiropractors? Time to test our knowledge. Did chiropractic come from osteopathic medicine? How many times have you been asked that? I mean, you're in the College of Osteopathic Medicine, your first year in the school, and you go home for Thanksgiving, and everybody asks you, isn't that like chiropractic, or what is this osteopathic thing you're doing? So is chiropractic, was it founded before osteopathic, or did it come from osteopathic? Was A.T. a chiropractor? I mean, you get all these questions. So some of our choices here include those. Did both of those start in Kansas? How about maybe a third-party confirmation from Oklahoma by an MD? Aren't DOs like chiropractors? D.D. Palmer was the discoverer of chiropractic. I always get this wrong. D.D. Palmer is the father of B.J. Palmer. You can see both of their pictures here. D.D. Palmer is the discoverer of chiropractic. B.J. Palmer is the developer of chiropractic. That's how they referred to themselves. D.D. Palmer says, initially he says his first adjustment was a partially deaf janitor by the name of Lillard, that he slapped him on the back and cured his deafness. This is not really well recorded. In fact, the Lillard family says they have no recollection of this. He also said he got it from a dead physician by the name of Atkins in a seance. Seances were very common back then. So where did he get it? Well, A.T. says he flung the banner in 1874, and he was practicing manipulation for a couple of decades prior to that. He opens a school in 1892. D.D. Palmer opens his school in 1895. At D.D. Palmer's school in 1895 are some DOs, including a man, Dr. Davis, Andrew Davis. Now, many of the early students at the School of Osteopathy, the American School of Osteopathy, ASO we call it, many of them were physicians. They knew A.T. Still, and they wanted to learn these methods. And so they enrolled in the school. So it was not uncommon to have a doctor as a student there. So they had both MDs that became DOs. Well, Davis goes on to become a chiropractor as well and teach at the school in Davenport, Iowa, the Palmer College of Chiropractic. Also, we have this evidence in the law when it comes to licensure in Wisconsin. So what did D.D. Palmer say? He said chiropractic is osteopathy gone to seed. Now, many of you have probably heard that. But what did he say right before that? And we have it in a classic collection of papers at the Palmer College of Chiropractic in recorded quotes of D.D. Palmer. Because Palmer did not write very well. He wasn't a very learned man. He wasn't formally educated, and he was often challenged about his education. And so he said, I took some expensive courses. I took electropathy. I took cranial diagnosis. I took hydrotherapy. I took facial diagnosis. Later, I took osteopathy, which gave me such a measure of confidence as to almost feel it unnecessary to seek other sciences for the mastery of curable disease. So he says it. He says he took osteopathy, but he was never a student at ASO. So there's Davis and a man named Struthers there in the first class. You can see the first class at ASO, and I've circled older man with a white beard. That's Davis. And above him, the man with the flat top and the bushy mustache, that's Struthers. And then Hildreth is just to the right of Davis, the dapper man holding his lapel. Hildreth writes a book, The Lengthening Shadow, about A.T. Still, but he doesn't write it, and it doesn't get published until 1930. And in there, he says that D.D. Palmer was treated by Still, and that he had dinner at the Still home, and that he had been a patient there, and that's how he learned chiropractic. But it's kind of challenged because it's written so long after the fact, and Hildreth's a DO, and maybe he's biased, right? Well, then we have Struthers and we have Davis that end up in Davenport teaching at the College of Chiropractic. And Struthers had actually gone back to Davenport, where he was from. Struthers is a Canadian. Palmer is a Canadian. They knew each other. He brings Palmer back to ASO in Kirksville after taking a break during his first year of study there. He brings Palmer back as a patient, and Palmer is treated 18 times. He has dinner at the Still house, which was not uncommon at the time. The Stills often had people over for dinner and at dinner parties. And they had these guest books where they kept track of people that were guests at their home. They had many of these books, and they stored them. As they were done with a book, they stored it under the stairs of the home. Not many people knew they were there. And when the home was taken down and the rubbish hauled off to the dump, some of these guest books went missing. So we don't have a record in the guest book of D.D. Palmer. But we have third-party confirmation in the book Spinal Treatment by Alva Gregory. Alva Gregory never went to Kirksville. He did not know Andrew Taylor Still, but he knew D.D. Palmer. He ran into him in Oklahoma. Palmer, when he leaves Davenport, his school is not doing very well. He's not a great business manager, and his school's not doing very well. He ends up turning it over to his son. Basically, it's in bankruptcy. His son, being the developer of chiropractic, gets it back on its feet. Palmer is traveling around, starting colleges of chiropractic. He's in Oregon for a while. He's in California. He ends up in Oklahoma, in Guthrie, Oklahoma, and he meets a man named Alva Gregory. Dr. Gregory is interested in spinal treatment. It is one of his areas of interest. And he sees this man doing these chiropractic manipulations. He says, "What are you doing there? And can you teach me?" And so they start the Palmer Gregory College. And so he knows Palmer. Palmer stays there several weeks and helps him get it going. But he realizes that Palmer doesn't have a lot of medical knowledge, so he's not going to be a professor at the school. But in his second edition of Spinal Treatment, he says that he talked to Palmer about how he got these ideas of how to do this manipulation. And he said he got it from an osteopath named Struthers. So we have third-party confirmation. We also have the licensure issue in Wisconsin. In 1905 and 1907, chiropractors are challenged about practicing osteopathy without a license. In 1905, they lose the case of Johnson and Whipple, where D.D. Palmer is the expert witness. And Palmer says, A.T. Still says the supremacy of the artery, and we have a different philosophy. Our philosophy is the supremacy of the nerve. Well, that is debunked by the expert witness who's an osteopath. And he says, well, the artery, the nerve, the vein, lymphatics all flow together. And yes, while the artery is supreme, you wouldn't have the nerve without it. So that's really not accurate. And they win the day. And this is devastating to chiropractic. they're very concerned about their profession as a result of the loss of this ability to become licensed. And some of them are arrested for practicing osteopathy without a license, including D.D. Palmer. B.J. Palmer is very concerned about this, and he comes across a man from Japan, Morikubo, Dr. Morikubo. He is a well-educated Japanese man who's been around the world studying all kinds of different methods of treatment. He studied Hindu, he can speak multiple languages, he has a PhD in philosophy. He looked into osteopathic medicine, he took some courses in it, thought it was very interesting as well. And he ends up in Davenport wanting to study chiropractic. And B.J. Palmer says, realizes what he has here. He has a jewel. He has this guy that can communicate their philosophy. And so he says, I'll do it in return for you communicating and going out with me and talking publicly about this. And they raise a lot of money for legal defense, and they hire an attorney, a former lieutenant governor of Wisconsin. And then after Morikubo finishes chiropractic college, they put him into practice in Wisconsin. He intends to go back to Japan and take his medical knowledge with him. But first, in return for his education, he does start a practice in Wisconsin. And he's challenged on licensure, that he's practicing osteopathy without a license. And he is the expert witness, and he wins the day, explaining the philosophy of chiropractic, that it's distinctly different from osteopathy, that they use smaller levers, shorter levers, that their philosophy is more spiritual and less medical. And he wins the day with his arguments, and they are licensed in Wisconsin. And I'll end with this. This is our founder, A.T. Still. This is a silent movie video that had been going around YouTube. It's much longer than what I'll show you here. But this is in his 86th year, on his porch there in Kirksville, where he was often found and would give spontaneous discussions. And this is probably a demonstration for the students. We're not really sure who this man is that he's treating, but it looks like he's using what we call Still's technique. And he's going to point out to you what he's doing here. He's going to show you a rib that he's been working on for this gentleman, and perhaps he's showing you where the head of the rib meets the transverse process and how important that is in our manipulative skills to know how to do that technique, what we call today Still's technique. So there he is. I'll leave you with him on his porch in his 86th year, 3 years before his death. He is honored with Still's techniques by one of his pupils, Charles Hazard, in 1905. A.T. Still did not write down his techniques. He believed every patient should have their own treatment plan. Thank you very much.